On the next episode of Painting and Travel, we visit the Titanic. Inside the submersible, 12,500 feet below the surface, Roger uses acrylics to work on original paintings while actually looking at the bow of the sunken ship.
Hi, and welcome to Painting and Travel. Several years ago, Roger was invited in his capacity as an artist to join an expedition venturing to the resting place of the famous ocean liner that tragically sank in 1912. A few years later, he had another opportunity to go out, and this time he took even more paints and brushes with him. Next, you'll see a first-hand account of his experience.
The Titanic rests 12,500 feet beneath the ocean, some 1,000 miles straight out from New York, but only 360 miles south of St. John's, Newfoundland. So if you're lucky enough to be invited on an expedition to Titanic, this is where it all starts. It was several days before we were scheduled to leave, so I spent many hours here on Signal Hill, exploring and sketching, as well as in town with its many houses and shops built on sloping hills. Being an avid painter of lighthouses, I used my time before we left port to sketch and paint the Fort Amherst Lighthouse. This is the Russian research vessel Keldysh, a well-maintained 400-foot ship fitted for ocean research. This was my second expedition to Titanic, so I was already familiar with the ship and its crew. That evening we left port. The Russian crew lined up on deck and tossed a few coins in the water for good luck. I made my way to the bow for a view of Signal Hill as we slowly pulled away. We passed the lighthouse I drew earlier, beacon glowing, and the last glimpse of St. John's now in the distance on our 36-hour journey to Titanic. On an expedition like this, there is always lots of technicians, scientists, people that know every nut and bolt in the Titanic. Their job is to do research. However, my job was to be there as an artist and record all this with an artist's eye. It's pretty close quarters in here. I mean, the stateroom is quite spacious, but it's not exactly like being at home in my studio. There's such rich, dark blues down there on the bottom. What I'm going to do here is just cover this whole illustration board here with this blue color, and then I'll work my details into it. These dark blues just get so intense and so dark. Get a little bit lighter in the foreground here. This will be a painting of the bow. Now I'll let that dry a few minutes, and I'll start putting in the railings. I would normally sketch this out in pencil a little bit first, but I don't have a pencil. So I'm just going to do it with the brush. Maybe just as good. Seems like I've painted this so many times I could practically do it from memory. Tomorrow I'll be looking at this face to face. Be able to see for myself if there's any changes in the bow from last time I was there. It's a little bit hard to paint here. The ship is rocking. Not too badly, but it sort of throws off my brush strokes. That's a start. I think I'll bring this down in the mirror tomorrow and work on it just a little bit more while I'm down there on the Titanic. Here, I'll pull this tape off of it. Before the submersibles, Mir 1 and Mir 2, are put over the side, much preparation is required. First, the ship's launch was lowered on the port side, and it plays a very important part in getting the submersibles launched safely. This is the day I was scheduled to dive, so I was in my cabin donning my Nomex fireproof suit provided me, while out on the deck, the pace of activity was really beginning to pick up. Many of the Russians on board became friends. This is Sergei, but the Americans on board called him Pierre because of the French beret he always wore. I think he was one of the chief mechanics. I had gathered my cameras, checked my batteries, and put together a small but sufficient array of acrylic paints and a few brushes in a plastic bag and made my way to the operations room. In the meantime, the Mir continued to be readied by the Russian crew, with the launch now poised off the starboard side. Back in the ready room, we were all getting last-minute instructions, much of it in Russian. I felt a bit like a fish out of water among all these people who knew so much more about Titanic and the science it took to get there than I did. This is Anatoly Sogolovich, who was the chief scientist and expedition leader and had a lot to do with the actual engineering of these submersibles. I signed what was called the dive protocol, which listed me as one of the crew members. I was putting my signature on everything without having the slightest clue what I was signing. All I knew was in the next few minutes, I would be locked inside the Mir and on my way to see Titanic. This is when everything became a blur of excitement. Supplies were being loaded into the Mir, lights and systems given a final check. I made my way past the activity and over to the Mir. The towboat began to pull alongside, the canopies above the submersibles lifted, and I gave a few final looks at the front of the Mir with all its cameras, lights, and mechanical arms. I climbed the ladder knowing for the next 13 hours I'd be in this small space. The Mir is 26 feet long, but the round sphere we entered, accommodating 3, measures less than 7 feet in diameter. Much of that was filled with electronics. There was no turning back at this point, not that I wanted to, because this is the adventure of a lifetime. Safely tucked inside, the dozens of skilled crew with their orange jumpsuits continued with each procedure in order to get us into the water. The soft pads gently grabbed the submersible. Last-minute details were checked and rechecked, and finally the cables holding us to the deck were released, and I felt a slight jolt from the hydraulic crane. Sergei gave us a final salute with Anatoly alongside. It was liftoff. Heavy cables were held taut by the crew to keep the submersible from getting damaged. The mirror began to lift from its perch and slowly began to swing over the side of the ship. Lying prone on the bench seat, I could look out the viewport, which was 4 inches in diameter, but it was 7 inches thick. A line was attached from the submersible to the towboat, and lowering into the water was slow and precise. Not an easy task for anyone involved, as the waves here in the North Atlantic can get quite rough. It was thrilling to see that first splash of clear, cold water cover the viewport, knowing Titanic lay directly beneath. Now the submersible at this point has to be separated from the tether and pulled away from the ship to keep it from slamming into the side, so a man known as the cowboy wrangles his way over to the mirror and jumps on board to disconnect us. Once that's accomplished, we're quickly pulled away. The cowboy stays atop the submersible just to be sure everything is okay. Inside, it's a pretty rough ride, everyone holding on. Jenna, our pilot, keeps busy checking his radios and electronics. When we're a few hundred feet from the ship, the cowboy leaps off into the cold waters, where he's picked up by a rubber dinghy and brought back to the ship. Inside, it's a flurry of activity for the pilot with communications and the many checks that go on. Once we're unattached and totally free, our 2.5-hour descent begins. At a depth of 1,500 to 2,000 feet is where the luminescent creatures live. I asked the pilot to turn off a few of the exterior lights that were on so I could look out. There I saw thousands, tens of thousands of mysterious creatures glowing in the dark. As our descent continued at about 100 feet a minute, the temperature began to drop inside the mirror, and by the time we reached the Titanic, it went from 95 down to 32 degrees. For me, there was not a lot to do except reflect at this time. However, the pilot kept busy with his instruments, communications, and filling out his log. It was all in Russian, of course, so it became kind of a white noise of static and unrecognizable words.
X640, Y72.
After 2.5 hours passed, we were almost there. Imagine sitting down just feet from the bow and seeing this. Titanic had plowed itself into the seabed upon sinking some 36 feet. Still, it was quite a distance to the railing, and this was the view out my 4-inch viewport. On my first expedition to Titanic, I was fascinated with this tiny creature. It was actually a type of sponge. It was like a living hood ornament placed there by Mother Nature. In a strange way to my artist eye, this small, insignificant symbol seemed to claim the entire ship as its own. I later thought of that little sponge as more of an angel on the bow. It had actually grown some since I had been there last, and I have painted it many times. Here are a few of those paintings. I was extremely fortunate on my dive, as the only real goal of my dive was so I could observe and paint, and I got the grand tour. This 3 by 5 foot oil painting was done back in my studio, trying to capture the scene from outside the submersible. You can see here where the sediment lies just below the 8-ton anchor. These icicle-looking things are called rusticles. They are iron-eating bacteria that live only at these depths and are literally devouring the ship. This is the huge auxiliary anchor weighing over 50 tons. Just below the bridge was Captain Smith's quarters. The decking had collapsed, exposing his stateroom and personal bathtub. On the side of the ship, we could see the promenade deck, and just below, portholes still intact with glass. As we slowly descended, the lights from the submersible cast its light on those porthole windows, giving us an eerie feeling that the ghostly light was actually coming from inside the ship. Well, now it was time to get down to work with a few paints and the partially finished paintings I brought down with me. There's another small painting here. I'm actually going to be working on this one a little bit while we're down here. My colors are limited just because we have such limited space. I've got some blues and browns. I worked in some small studios. This is definitely the smallest studio I ever worked in. Most exciting too. I can't believe we're down here on the Titanic. I'm working on some paintings. It's unbelievable. I also want to get enough time so we can see everything down there, but right now this is something that I want to accomplish. These are more sketches than anything, but they certainly will have some historic significance, having been painted down here on the Titanic. Never been done before. There it is. The first painting that's ever been worked on and signed down here on the Titanic.
Animals, breathing here.
That's my favorite part of Titanic. To finish the paintings, I wanted to add one more feature to the originals, just to make them really special and unique. I continued to stamp and sign each of the many small paintings I had brought with me.
Here's the stamp from my dive. I'll put some other dive stamps on here as well. For now, here's the one dive stamp.
There have probably been thousands of paintings done of Titanic, but what a great opportunity to have done original paintings that are not only of Titanic, but have actually been to the bow of the ship. I think it was a first. Here are a few of those pieces.
That's it. We're leaving the Titanic. I'm exhausted.
You happy?
I never worked so hard. I'm really happy. Going back up. This was incredible. It was as good as the first time, maybe better.
retrieval of artifacts was another aspect of the expeditions. Here we found a leather bag from a third-class passenger that was still intact. We were also amazed to find the remains of the ship's wheel. Right now I'm going to paint another view of the bow. Right here I have a reference photo I took from the dive, and I'm going to begin by using some phthalo blue. It's a very, very powerful, strong blue, because those colors down there were extremely vivid. So I'll just tone this board. These are acrylics, they'll dry very fast. I put this phthalo blue on quite thick to get a flat surface, and I'm taking a large brush just to smooth out those brush strokes. So now with a pastel pencil, I'm going to sketch the bow of the ship from my reference photograph. I also have a few other original paintings here so I can see some of the color that I actually saw down there a little bit better than on my photograph. So I'll use this as reference as well. Take some of my white, some cerulean blue. I'll start by using my darker colors first. Then I'll lay my lighter colors over this. I don't want to push the lights too soon on this painting. I want to keep it all fairly dark and then use my lights for some accents and highlights towards the end. I'm spraying my board just so these acrylics will flow over this dry paint and soften the edge, because everything down here is very sort of soft and out of focus. Right back here is the anchor, but we can't see that very well. But I will put in a little bit of blue color back there. So now, having put in those dark areas, I will begin to put in more of the lights, the light tones. This is basically cerulean blue and white. These rusticles are very fragile. If you were to touch one of them, they would just sort of turn to powder. Here again, I can spray my board because these are acrylics and they dry fast. So spraying it often will help me keep this nice soft edge. Now my photograph doesn't show all these colors, but when I was down there, there are a lot of other colors, and they're sort of reddish ochre colors here. So I'm looking at this too, and I'll begin to add some of those burnt sienna, yellow ochre tones. And they appear a little bit more when there's a bright light shining on them. So right up here is where the light of the submersible was hitting it mostly. So that's the brightest part. Here we have that knife edge on the very bow of the ship. I'm sort of cautious as I go here, not to get things too light right away. I want to build up these lights because I want to keep this dark, rich look to the painting to give that nice underwater look, that deep sea feeling. Here I'll begin to put in these railings. These two were covered with the rusticles. I'll put them in kind of straight right now, and then we'll add those rusticles in a moment or two. Here the railing comes around and bends and comes back right this way. This water was very cold. In fact, on my expedition, I wanted to actually jump in the water right above the Titanic, which I did, just for the experience of knowing what that was like. And it really took my breath away. Here we have 5 railings here. So here's the second railing. Another right here. I'll keep those fairly evenly spaced. And then the last one right here. Dip into my white, some more cerulean blue. And I'll just continue to build these areas lighter and lighter. It's really a fairly easy painting because these railings, of course, they're straight, but they're covered with these rusticles. And it's easy to make these strokes because they are quite ragged. That first pass was just to indicate where they are, be sure they were in the right position. Right here on the bow of this ship, this rolls over just like this. There's not much detail left there anymore, but I can see a little bit of it, so I'll add that. It's really a shame this is deteriorating so much, but we did manage to get actually hundreds of artifacts retrieved on the expedition. They will be preserved for people to see in years to come. Okay, I'll pick up some white. Painting is going very quickly. Don't think I'll need to do too much more. Another spray of water. Keep that paint flowing nice and soft. Get that soft edges. A few more lighter tones down here. This seems to be a little bit too dark. I'll take some white again. Mix it with some of this blue. We'll put the last few accents on here. Just some highlights, just to bring the attention back up into this area as much as I can. Well, I think I'm just about finished with this. Didn't take very long at all, but I've painted it so many times I'm very familiar with the subject. I made a few more corrections here. There's only 3 railings at the bow here. There's 5 here, so I took those 2 railings out there. Now with some pure white, just add a few small accents right here, just a little sparkles. Well, to finish this painting, I'll take some pure white and I'll put in this little living creature here, this little sponge right at the bow of the ship. It's just amazing that little creature chose to live right there on the very bow. Quite beautiful. Well, I don't see anything else I need to do to this painting, so I think I'll just complete it now by signing it. Whoa! I'm not kidding. This really takes your breath away. This is cold.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.